This is a frontier city, a gateway between England and Scotland. Its past is a symbol of the mighty Roman Empire. Its coal helped build a city to rival London in its wealth and grandeur. Its inventors pushed forward the Industrial Revolution and changed the world forever. And it's come back from hard times to be reborn as a thoroughly modern city. This is Newcastle. Newcastle is a city of invention and reinvention, the birthplace of the light bulb, cheap electricity, and the fastest ships in the world. Our journey through its rich history will take us from its beginnings as England's northernmost fortress through to its heyday as the heartland of Victorian ingenuity, and from the brutal decline of its shipyards and factories to its glittering regeneration. Newcastle is a fighting city, a city to be reckoned with. Newcastle's bridges are among its best-known features, all different and each one an amazing feat of engineering. The swing bridge, the double-decker high-level bridge, the Gateshead Millennium tilting bridge, and the best way to see them is by boat. There are 7 bridges across the Tyne between Newcastle on the north side and Gateshead on the south, and they're all well known, but the most famous is the Tyne Bridge. It's a real symbol of Newcastle's pride and engineering ingenuity. The steel and granite bridge spans 531 feet. The builders risked their lives high above the waters of the Tyne. Geordies, that's people who were born around here, like to claim that the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia was copied from the Tyne Bridge. But I'm sorry, that's not true. It was the other way round. But because this is smaller, it was finished first. The bridge was completed and opened in 1928 by King George and Queen Mary. They were the first to cross it. The Tyne Bridge is a real symbol for Newcastle and indeed the whole of the North East, but it's not the first bridge that crossed the Tyne. That was built 1900 years ago. Newcastle is in the northeast of England. It lies about 10 miles west of the mouth of the River Tyne, located at the point where the river narrows. And it was here that the Romans built the first bridge across the river. At this point, the banks of the river are fairly steep, and the Romans built a fort to defend their bridge on the highest bit of ground, there where the castle is now. And that's part of a whole string of forts that stretches right across the country, linked by the most important structure the Romans put up in Britain, Hadrian's Wall. The wall was built by the Roman Emperor Hadrian and runs for a massive 80 miles across the width of England, separating the Roman occupiers in the south from the barbarians in the north. A truly amazing structure. This is Wall's End, the end of Hadrian's Wall. It's still 6 miles to the North Sea, but the Romans reckoned the barbarians wouldn't be able to swim the river down here, so they stopped building and put a fort there, and the remains are still there. It's called Segedunum, and it's about 200 yards inland. But right on the edge of the water here is the remains, rather newer remains, of Newcastle's greatest industry, shipbuilding. This is the Swan Hunter shipyard. In its 130-year history, they've built more than 1,600 vessels, including oil tankers, icebreakers, destroyers, submarines, cargo vessels, and floating docks. A really remarkable record. Shipbuilding was a source of national pride, and Swan Hunter was the best-known shipyard in the country. In its heyday, the works covered nearly 80 acres, and thronged with 45,000 workers who were housed in terraces that led down to the shipyard. In 1903, they launched the Carpathia, which picked up survivors from the Titanic disaster in 1912. And in 1906, they launched the Mauretania, which for 22 years held the blue ribbon for the fastest ever crossing of the Atlantic. The Mauretania was the largest passenger ship ever built on the Tyne, but her speed came from her revolutionary engines. I've come to Newcastle's Discovery Museum to find out more. The Mauretania was powered by an entirely new sort of engine, a steam turbine, which was invented here in Newcastle in 1884 by Charles Parsons. The first one he made was, well, it was only generating 7.5 kilowatts, that's enough for about 3 kettles, but he went on to make bigger ones, including this one here, which was 1899. This generated 500 kilowatts, enough for a whole street. Let me show you how it worked. The high pressure steam would come out of this hole here, which of course couldn't escape because this lid was bolted down tight onto it. So the only way it could get out was by going through these slits here, and that meant that the steam was forced to go downwards, and that meant that pushed the shaft round the other way. And once it had gone through these slits, it had to go through these slits and these and these and all the way along the shaft until it's going faster and faster. And with an electric generator at the end, it generates those 500 kilowatts. Well, since then, they've got bigger and bigger, and today it is vast steam turbines that generate 80% of the world's electricity. Let me show you the principle. I'm going to use this kettle to generate steam, and the steam will go up the spout, along the rubber tubing, out through this nozzle, and hit these little metal cups on the wheels, spinning it round. And at the end of this shaft, there is a little generator which will generate electricity and light up this vast red light bulb here. So, let's see if it works. I'll just plug in my kettle. I'm going to stand back because this is high pressure steam and I don't particularly want to get squirted with it. And now there's steam coming out, and I'll give it a little flick to start it. Look at that! Fantastic! Going at huge speed, and is the bulb's alight. Look, glowing like mad. That's probably enough to power a whole street. And that is the principle of Charles Parsons' steam turbine. To showcase his new invention, Parsons built an experimental vessel, the first ever steam turbine-powered boat, the Toby Nia, which is now on display at Newcastle's Discovery Museum. In 1897, Toby Nia was the fastest ship in the world, and I'm going to meet someone to be shown round. Ian Whitehead is Keeper of Maritime History for Tyne and William Museums. Ian, where did Parsons travel on the boat, yeah?
Parsons would have stood roughly where you're standing now.
Oh, I see. And he'd be looking after whoever's driving the engine.
Yes, he'd keep his eye on the pressure gauges for the 3 turbines and for the condenser and the main valves here as well, so He could keep good control of what was going on in the engine room.
And presumably shouting at the poor bloke standing here.
Yes, there'd be somebody else who was the
scapegoat.
The under-engineer
yes.
working there.
How fast did she actually go?
Eventually she reached 34.5 knots, about 40 miles an hour.
Wow, that's very quick, isn't it? That's about what today's huge cruise liners do, isn't it, at max?
Absolutely, max. Yeah, they mostly keep under 30 knots, I think, when they're going.
Brilliant. Oh, well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Terrific.
Pleasure.
I love this ship. Could we just go for a little run down the Tyne?
It takes us a minute to cut her loose of her moorings, Adam, but I'm sure we can.
Excellent, excellent. I look forward to it. The River Tyne was Newcastle's lifeline. The quayside saw brisk trade in leather, fish and glass. But medieval Newcastle's growing prosperity was destroyed by the border wars between Scotland and England. However, it was saved by its wealth of rich minerals that lay all along the banks of the Tyne. The history of Newcastle is inextricably linked to coal. It was coal that made Newcastle the industrial giant it is. The Industrial Revolution was powered by coal, and Newcastle was the most important port. And that was mainly because all along the banks here there were rocky outcrops of the stuff. You could walk along, kick the ground, and there was coal. And because it was by the river, it was easy to transport to wherever it was needed. Back before the Industrial Revolution, medieval London was suffering from a fuel crisis. Forests in the south had all been cut down, and as early as the 14th century, Newcastle was shipping coal to the capital to be used as fuel instead of wood. A royal act in 1530 gave the port of Newcastle a monopoly on all coal shipments from the Tyneside area, and this meant the city began to rival London in its wealth, and its population grew to 10,000. The words coal and Newcastle go together like fish and chips. In fact, if you're asked to do something totally pointless, you say, that's like carrying coals to Newcastle. And do you know that expression was first recorded in 1538? Until 200 years ago, when the river was dredged, seafaring ships couldn't sail along the Tyne to Newcastle because it was too shallow. Smaller vessels called keels had to ferry the coal out to waiting ships. For hundreds of years, the trade of the keelmen was vital to the coal industry.
Wheelman the keel row, the keel row, the keel row. Wheelman the keel row that my laddie's in.
But in the middle of the 18th century, the river commissioners decided to improve the river so that big ships could get further inland. And then they built great big staiths, wooden piers that projected out into the river so that they could deliver the coal straight into the holds of the coal ships, the colliers. Then, of course, the keels weren't needed anymore, and the keelmen all lost their jobs. These are Dunstan staiths. They were built in 1890, and they were the last working staiths on the Tyne. Allegedly, this was the biggest wooden structure in Europe, and it's certainly quite substantial.
At its peak in the 1920s, Dunstan Staiths was shipping an average of 140,000 tonnes of coal every week on vessels bound for London and the continent. More than 20 million tonnes of coal and coke were exported from the River Tyne. To satisfy the demand for coal, mining had moved away from the river to deep pit mines in the hilly terrain of the surrounding countryside. But how did they begin to transport this coal from the mines to the river?
Solving the problem of transporting Newcastle's black gold drove forward the development of steam locomotives like this one and ushered in the glorious railway age of steam.
And I'm off to see the rocket, the most famous engine of the steam age. I've come to Beamish Museum to find out about Newcastle's black gold.
This is the stuff that Newcastle was built on, coal. In fact, it was literally coming out of the ground, so it was easy to shovel it into baskets on the banks of the Tyne and straight onto ships to take off to London or anyone who wanted it. But unfortunately, the demand grew and they had to mine further underground and further inland. So how on earth were they going to get all this heavy stuff to the banks of the Tyne? And here's the answer. These great big coal wagons called chaldrons, which amazingly were pulled by horses. And they were pulled on the 17th century Newcastle roads, but not regular roads, these were railroads. These were the first railways in the world.
The Newcastle roads were built first of wood and later of iron. With demand increasing for coal, the need for a more efficient means of transport than the horse and cart led to a technological innovation that would change the world. Steam engines were first used in the coalfields as colliery winding engines. They hauled the coal from the seams in the pits to the surface. Later, these static steam engines were set up at the end of the rail lines where they hauled the coal wagons along the rails using strong wire rope. Locomotives, or steam engines on wheels, were a natural progression from these stationary machines. This is Puffing Billy, which was originally built in 1813. The curator of transport at Beamish Museum is Paul Jarman.
So this is Puffing Billy.
That's right.
Presumably because it made a terrific noise when going along.
That's one of the theories. The other rather crueler one was that its designer, Headley, had asthma, so when he walked along, William Headley, he puffed and wheezed.
Oh, that's rather unfortunate. So is it he or she?
Well, it was actually called Jane, so it has something of an identity crisis. We tend to refer to him or her as Billy. It's kind of doesn't really matter.
Oh, right, OK. This is not the real thing, right? This is a replica.
It is. It's about 3 years old now.
Right. And going well?
It runs very, very well. It's exceeded our expectations, given the age it comes from.
Right, yes. So this was just making money, rather than using ponies or something.
That's right.
This was cheaper to pull coal wagons.
You could pull more, you could move them quicker, and at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, you've got to remember there was a shortage of horses and fodder. So it was purely kind of a bottom line profit exercise.
Right. So this beast never pulled a passenger?
Not officially.
Right. You mean people would jump on for the ride?
They would. And there's stories that it took on payday the miners down to the pub and so on. You know, they would ride the coal trucks. So booze cruising, I suppose.
Excellent.
One man everyone associates with locomotives is George Stevenson. He came from a poor working-class family in the village of Wylam, about 9 miles west of Newcastle, but became one of the world's most famous engineers. I'm taking a ride on one of George's most famous engines. George was gripped by railway fever, and it turned out that his engine designs were efficient and reliable. And this is one of his. Well, it's a replica. This is a replica of Locomotion, which was built in 1825 to pull trains on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which was the world's first steam-powered railway. It was actually mainly built to carry coal, but they also stuck a few passenger seats on, and it was a tremendous success. At the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, passengers cheered wildly, and people followed on horse-drawn carriages, all amazed at the extraordinary, fiery iron horse. Locomotion was built at Stevenson's factory in Newcastle on South Street, which opened in 1823. It was the first ever locomotive factory in the world. Over 70 years, these works produced 3,000 steam engines. This is Rocket, arguably the most famous steam locomotive of all time, built by George's son Robert Stephenson in these very works. This is the very spot where the engine was built. And this, of course, is not the real thing. This is just a model. And she was leading-edge technology. And let me explain why. The coal from here was burnt in the firebox, this black thing here at the back. And all the hot gases and smoke went through the boiler, this yellow boiler, into the smoke box at the front here, and then up the chimney. And between here and here, there were 25 brass tubes, 3 inches in diameter. And it was because of all that large number of brass tubes and the big total surface area that the heat was transferred very efficiently into the water and made masses of steam pressure. And that was why Rocket was the fastest and most efficient steam engine in the world. Absolutely leading edge technology. Let me turn up the juice a little bit and see if she'll go. Come on, old girl. Look at that. She would do 30 miles an hour, an unheard of speed in those days. Yeah! Wow! Look at that speed! George had such faith in his son that he made Robert a managing partner in charge of the works at just 19 years old, the youngest managing partner in the country. The works produced not just steam locomotives, but marine and colliery engines. They even built a rail river ferry to take trains across the Nile. Even though Stephenson's works had been making locomotives for passenger railways for a good 20 years, it wasn't until 1849 that the railway actually came to Newcastle. Until then, trains from London stopped at Gateshead, as no one could build a bridge across the steep gorge of the Tyne. Robert Stevenson solved this problem by designing the high-level bridge, a double-decker bridge for road and rail traffic. Remarkably, the bridge can withstand heavier modern trains and cars, and with a £38 million overhaul just completed, it's projected to last another 80 years. George and Robert Stevenson lived in a confident and ambitious time, a dawning of a new age that was to see Newcastle become a world leader in technology, in locomotives, shipbuilding and steam turbines. It didn't stop there though. One man whose name is synonymous with Newcastle's industrial heyday is Lord William Armstrong.
Armstrong's family used to joke that he had water on the brain, but actually that wasn't far from the truth. Water and a fishing trip gave him an idea that would change not only Newcastle, but the entire world.
This engineering innovation would lead 100 years later to the most advanced tanks of our generation. And I'm off to see this one, the Titan. Newcastle was at the forefront of building hydraulic cranes that could lift impossible weights and guns that revolutionised warfare.
It's amazing to think that all that came about from a spot of fishing, because it was while he was fishing that the great Newcastle industrialist William Armstrong had a brilliant idea, an idea so good it made him rich and famous, and it changed the world. You know, I almost caught a big one now, almost. His father made him become a lawyer, but he was much more interested in science and engineering, and he was especially fascinated by the power of water. He was out fishing one day when he saw a water wheel in action. It was supplying power to a marble quarry, and he realised it was incredibly inefficient because the water was sort of splashing over the top and much of the power was being wasted. So when he got back to Newcastle, he designed a rotary engine when the whole stream was contained in a tube, and that meant he could use all the energy. But nobody was very interested in that, so he designed another engine, this time using pistons in cylinders. And then he could make a crane. And I've got one here. This is an early prototype of Armstrong's crane. I've got two syringes here, one thin one and one fat one. In fact, this one has about half as much water in it as that one. And what I'm going to do is to push on my finger to push the water out of this into that one. And because that one's much fatter, all this water will only open that one up about halfway, but it'll multiply the force. If I push with 1 kilogram here, it'll push up with 2 kilograms there. And with one finger, I can lift a car. Just watch this. In it goes. You'll see the water going up into the big syringe and the car sailing into the air. And it was said that Armstrong's hydraulic cranes allowed people to lift things that were hitherto thought to be unmovable.
Because they could unload ships much faster, Armstrong's cranes were installed all along the quayside. His success meant that he could resign from the law practice and set up his own factory. In 1847, he bought 5½ acres of land alongside the river at Elsick, west of the centre of Newcastle. Soon after, in 1854, Armstrong read about the problems the British Army were facing in the Crimean War in moving their heavy field guns. He designed a lighter gun, capable of firing a shell 3 times the distance of guns twice its weight. The next phase of Armstrong's career had begun. He then turned to building naval guns, using his hydraulic expertise to ease the operation of these massive barrels. He teamed up with a shipbuilder in Low Walker, east of Newcastle Centre. The warships were built there, and then Armstrong fitted them out with guns. For a long time, Newcastle was the only place in the world that could build and arm a warship.
But there was a bit of a problem. The ships were coming from Low Walker, which is down that way towards the sea, but they couldn't get upriver towards his factory because there was a low bridge in the way.
Only flat-bottomed keels could carry goods under the low stone arches of the Georgian Bridge, nowhere near big enough for the entrepreneurial Armstrong's needs.
I'm standing where that low bridge used to be, and yes, it's still low. But watch this. To solve his problem and get the ships up to his factory, Armstrong built a new bridge, the Swing Bridge, in 1876. It can turn 360 degrees to let the ships pass. Hello, George. How's it going?
Very well, this week.
Good, good. Now, can I take it the other half?
Yes.
You think I'm...
Jump up and turn that handle.
Turn it which way? Towards me?
Towards you.
Okay, like that. How far do I go?
You'll feel it tighten up.
Oh, yeah.
Right, that's it.
That's it? We're moving.
Yeah. And
How heavy is this bridge?
about 1,200 tons.
1,200 tons.
And it's like that with water.
Fantastic. So when do I stop?
When we get to the Tyne Bridge tower,
Yes.
you just put it back to this mark here.
Right. And it'll just coast all the rest of the way?
We'll find out. So about now.
Now?
Yeah. The idea is not to let it stop. If we let it stop, then we've got to put a lot more power.
Okay.
If we can keep it moving.
It's floating quite nicely now, so it's got the width of the roadway to go. Another tiny tweak? Or is
Yes.
it? Right.
And off. If we're going to go too fast, you see, it doesn't know where to stop. We haven't got it properly trained after 140 years.
Does the weather make a lot of difference?
Yes, the weather alters things because of the oils and greases we use.
Oh, okay.
Tweak again.
Right. Oh, I'm going the wrong way.
Off. This one way is fast. I bet it flies now.
Nah, not with the skill of this driver. It's going beautifully.
You're not going to get it.
Ah,
Yeah, let me do that.
all right. You just got to touch it.
No, just if I go past, it's my fault. We can't have the star presenter making a nest.
Well, that's brilliant, George. Thanks very much indeed. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Armstrong used his hydraulic genius to invent this swing bridge, and the whole thing is driven by water. I'll show you roughly how it works. I've got this high-tech bit of equipment here to switch the water on. And it comes from a hydraulic accumulator, which is actually under there. We can't see it, it's down there. And it consists of a 60-ton weight on top of a piston compressing the water to 600 pounds per square inch. That's terrifically high pressure. So the high pressure water then comes along this wonderful brass pipe, along to this set of hydraulic rams. And you'll see there are 3 of them, and they're operating exactly out of phase, so one is always pushing. So this is pushing, the end one's pushing, and then the middle one. Push, push, push. Always one of them pushing. So you get wonderful, steady, rotating movement. And if we then put this in gear, I'd have to move this along and get that cog meshing with the big one, then all these cogs would turn, and they in turn would move this. It's a rack and pinion system, and this is the rack, which is actually attached to the bridge. So it would be a water engine actually turning the bridge round physically. It's a wonderful system. The whole thing designed by Armstrong, and all this is his original gear. Wonderful. In the early years of the 20th century, Armstrong's company dominated arms manufacture, supplying countries all over the world. They even built the Japanese fleet that defeated the Russians in the War of 1905. Elswick Works was crucial to Britain's industrial economy and employed 60,000 people. A whole community grew around the terraces that were built to house the workers, with a pub on every corner. But for himself, Armstrong created somewhere quite different to live, the most modern house in the world. I've come to Cragside, which Armstrong bought in the 1860s as a fishing lodge. He came here for his holidays. Eventually he moved and lived here, And he extended the house again and again and again, and also used it as the basis for all his scientific and engineering experiments, until it became the most technologically advanced house in the world. The house had all sorts of modern conveniences, even, guess what, a dishwasher. It so amazed his Victorian guests that they called this the palace of a modern magician. He designed an automated spit roasting device, operated by water, of course. A telephone. I don't think there's anyone there. Mind you, this was only an internal telephone because no other house in the country had one. A century and a half ago, there was even running hot water. And Craigside was the first house in the world to be lit by hydroelectricity. By damming the nearby rivers, Armstrong created lakes from which flumes and tunnels carried water at pressure down to the powerhouse that he built in 1886. The water came down into the powerhouse here through a great big pipe like that at a pressure of about 150 pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure. And it went into this turbine and spun this shaft. You'll see this shaft turning now as the water were going through it, although it would go rather quicker, of course, with 150 pounds per square inch of water. And here is his dynamo. This great box here was how he generated his electricity. He built this in 1886. And then he realised there was a bit of a problem, because if they had to stop the system for maintenance or something like that, all the lights would go out. So then in 1895, he added a second dynamo, and he used this to charge up a whole stack of batteries, like car batteries outside. And then they could run the lights for maybe a couple of days without having any hydropower. It's wonderful, isn't it? Let me show you the principle of Armstrong's turbine. He took water from the lakes up in the hills and brought it down through pipes and drove a wheel, a bit like this water wheel I've got here, and this is going to drive this shaft, and that will spin this belt, and that will turn the dynamo and generate electricity and light up this colossal light bulb here. 1, 2, 3, go. There it goes. And look, the light bulb's coming on. We're generating hydroelectricity, just like Armstrong did 130 years ago, or whatever it was. Fantastic. We could easily light the whole house with that. Immense power of the water generating electricity. It's exactly the same principle as Charles Parsons' steam turbine. And you can see where Parsons must have got the idea from. It's just that high pressure steam carries a lot more oomph than water. By the 1930s, the Armstrong Company's dominance of the arms trade was threatened by cheaper manufacturers around the world. With reduced orders, jobs were lost, and within 50 years the workforce shrank from over 60,000 to a mere 700. The demise of the works had grave implications for the once thriving local area. In the 1960s, there were slum clearance programs. Terraces were demolished, the community disappeared, and high-rises were built in their place. Today, business parks have replaced Armstrong's mile-long works, but one factory carries on his legacy. They make tanks here like this Challenger 2, right on the site of Armstrong's old works. Drive on, drive on! This factory may look slightly different to Armstrong's, but when it was built 25 years ago, it was the largest open-plan factory in Western Europe, at 1/3 of a mile long. And they make all sorts of tanks. Isn't that fantastic? This is the Titan tank. It can lay a bridge in less than 2 minutes. It's the fastest bridge layer in the world. And look, it's 34 metres long.
Big enough, strong enough to take tanks over a 30-metre river. Absolutely amazing. These bits of string are extraordinary. This is Kevlar rope. It's not wire horse, a Kevlar rope, taking the whole way to the far end, but actually most of the work is done by hydraulics. It's a direct legacy of William Armstrong. This city has a rich history as the birthplace of great inventions. I'm going to find out about the Newcastle chemist who beat Edison to create the first light bulb in the world. This is one of the oldest buildings in Newcastle. There's been a castle here for ages, but when Henry II rebuilt it, they called it the Newcastle, and that's how the city got its name. The walls of this castle are solid stone, and some of them are 18 feet thick. You wouldn't have thought it could be threatened, would you? And yet, the castle was almost destroyed in the name of progress. The man who really knows about this castle is historian David Simpson. David, what happened to the castle?
Well, in the 1300s, they built some town walls around the old town of Newcastle, and they included the castle, but the castle wasn't part of those defensive walls, so it was kind of stranded in the middle of the town.
And useless.
Yeah, it became redundant.
And what happened next?
Well, in 1400, Newcastle was made a county in its own right, but the castle and the immediate area around it, called the Castle Garth, remained part of the county of Northumberland, so it fell under a separate jurisdiction, and lots of dodgy things started to happen. For example, criminals would start to take refuge in the area immediately around the castle because they were outside of the jurisdiction of the town.
What happened when the railway came?
Well, the railways arrived in the 1840s, bringing the railway from London to Edinburgh right through Newcastle, and amazingly it cut right through the castle. It separated the keep from the Blackgate, the two best parts of the castle, but still it spoils the continuity of the building.
And did the railway make a big difference to the city?
Yes, it changed the whole focus of the city because the medieval town of Newcastle was situated on the quayside, down by the river. But then from the 1840s, the high-level bridge brought the city onto a new level, if you like, because then we had the development of the magnificent streets like Grainger Street and Grey Street in the Grainger Town area of the city that we can still see today.
This is Grey Street, one of the main thoroughfares of Grainger's new centre, and described by Pevsner as one of the finest streets in England. This is Grainger Town. In the 1830s, Richard Grainger, a Newcastle builder and developer, saw an opportunity to create a new, grand and elegant heart to the town centre. It was a visionary scheme which transformed Newcastle, and its architecture has become known nationally as Tyneside Classical. And at the very centre of Grainger Town there's a wonderful monument in honour of Charles Earl Grey. He was the chap who forced through the Reform Act of 1832 and also had some tea named after him, Earl Grey. I guess I'd better go up there. This monument was built 6 years after Earl Grey's bill reformed parliamentary elections and commemorates Newcastle's pride in this political legacy. They say there are 164 steps up here. It feels like about 1,000. But at least from the top, I should be able to see the whole of Grainger Town. It took him only 8 years to build 600 buildings, and 40% of them are listed. And oh, I hate heights. I really hate heights. But at least from up here, you can see the elegant layout of Grainger Town. Wow. Wow. Grainger built the Theatre Royal and the Grainger Market, the best surviving example of a large covered market in the country. It's the size of 2 football pitches, and there's even a rare original Marks and Spencer's Penny Bazaar, one of their very first shops. Just round the corner at the bottom of Grey Street is Mosley Street, and this street was the first one in the world to be lit by an incandescent streetlight in February 1879. Shortly before this momentous day, the man behind this incandescent light bulb, Joseph Wilson Swan, had demonstrated his invention in the lecture theatre of the Newcastle Literary and Philosophical Society, commonly known as the Lit and Phil.
This venerable institution had among its members all the great and the good of Newcastle, including our friends Lord William Armstrong, Robert Stevenson, Richard Grainger and Earl Grey. It was built in 1825, and this fabulous library is the largest independent library outside London. The American inventor Thomas Alva Edison is usually credited with the invention of the light bulb, but actually he was beaten to it by Joseph Wilson Swan. Now, the critical thing about the light bulb is the filament in the middle. That's the bit of very thin wire which glows extremely hot and gives us our light. They had to make filaments of carbon, and they tried to do it by carbonizing fibres. Edison believed he could use natural fibres, bamboo particularly, but Swan realised he really needed artificial fibres which would be exactly the same all the way along the length, and so he made the world's first artificial fibres. Well, the other thing they had to do was to get rid of the air, because if you heat up any filament in air, it'll burn out as soon as it gets red hot. So what they both did, Edison and Swan, was to encase the filament in a glass bulb and pump all the air out. So there was a vacuum and no oxygen to burn up the filament. Well, I'm going to try and demonstrate that, not with a vacuum, but using nitrogen. Now, here is my filament. You can just see it there, very, very fine tungsten wire I'm using because I don't have any carbonized natural fibres myself. And I'm going to take this pop bottle and pour liquid nitrogen into it. Now, this is very, very cold, and so when it hits the bottle, it'll start boiling. And you can see it boiling away in the bottom there because, as far as the nitrogen is concerned, the bottle's very hot. And after a few seconds, it will have evaporated enough to have blown all the oxygen, all the air out of the bottle. So with luck, this will be full of nitrogen, and there won't be any oxygen to burn up my filament. So I put the filament there into pure nitrogen, turn it round, switch on the current, and then gradually increase it. And you can see very quickly it glows orange, and with a bit more current, and it'll get very, very bright. About 1500 degrees, it's bright yellow heat, and it will probably go up to white hot. But let me just show you what happens if I take it out of the nitrogen. Are you ready for this? So it's in the nitrogen, it's in the nitrogen. I don't want to touch it on the side of the bottle, and there, and it burns out at once. It can't take the oxygen. So that was Joseph Wilson's brilliance, to make artificial fibres so they were absolutely uniform, and then to have a really good vacuum so they wouldn't burn out in the air.
Newcastle a century ago was wealthy and prosperous. It was a city at the forefront of technological, industrial and engineering innovations. But 100 years later, Newcastle's crucial industries were gone. The region lost shipyards, coal mines and arms manufacture over generations of decline. At the end of the 1980s, unemployment in some areas was more than 50%. The city's decay was everywhere.
But Newcastle and across the river Gateshead are cities reborn. Only a few decades ago, this quayside was practically derelict, but massive regeneration programmes have entirely changed the area. And the most dramatic symbol of the regeneration is the Gateshead Millennium Bridge.
The Gateshead Millennium Bridge was opened to the public in September 2001. It's the world's first and only tilting bridge.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Gateshead Millennium Bridge. We're going to open the bridge in a few minutes, so please clear the bridge. Please clear the bridge. Thank you. That ought to shift them. Well, that wasn't very exciting, was it? Is that all? That's it.
The structure is one solid piece, and when it moves, the arch operates as a counterweight to the bridge. The whole quayside area is full of exciting new buildings. The Sage Concert Hall, the Baltic Art Gallery. And 10 years ago, the largest sculpture in Britain was built to announce Tyneside to the world. And appropriately, it was built on the site of an old coal mine.
The Angel of the North in Gateshead was created by sculptor Anthony Gormley, and it's one of the most viewed pieces of artwork in the world because it's seen by 90,000 drivers on the A1 every day. That's 33 million a year. It's 20 metres high and its wingspan is a massive 54 metres. Wonderful. The angel symbolises Tyneside's industrial past and its open arms welcome the future.
In a moment on history, we reach the final part of David Starkey's profile of the Queen who died heirless, having raised England from obscurity to great power, Elizabeth I.